So there are four general big things that have happened to us during the past 100 years. Before that, there was Newton, him, Isaac, the guy who said action equal reaction, who said gravity, and said a bunch of other things. When Einstein created his theory of general relativity, he did it as an act of reconciliation. He wanted to reconcile the work of Newton, who after all was a giant thinker. He was also very clever, by the way, and a good publicist. But he was a giant thinker. And when Einstein wrote Special Relativity, he wrote it in order to, among other things, in order to deal with a problem that Newton had with gravity, which was that Newton believed that gravity propagated with infinite speed, that gravity could operate at a distance instantaneously. That was because Newton didn't have adequate tools to figure out how fast light actually traveled. Now, we know that gravity propagates, like everything else, at the speed of light, even though we may not know why. We know that because we know nothing travels faster than the speed of light. Now, the reason we know that was Einstein's special theory of relativity. Now, after Einstein completed the special theory of relativity, he went on to do the general theory of relativity. Now, when he did that, there were things that he neglected. Everybody does. When they put a theory together, they have to. First of all, in the theory of special relativity, Einstein showed that, in fact, gravity does propagate at the speed of light, and he also showed that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. Now, that was not actually the way he got at his conclusion. What he did show was something a little more complex, and we'll come to it in a little while. There are a number of ways in which quantum mechanics came into conflict with general relativity. And Einstein had a lot of trouble, as I'm sure you know, with the ideas of quantum mechanics, which came into being because general relativity did not deal with the very, very small. And in fact, the very, very small operates in a completely different way. Now, when quantum mechanics was created, quantum mechanics did not take into account the idea of gravity. In that extent, quantum mechanics idealizes reality by pretending that Newton's gravitational constant is negligible or doesn't exist. Now, on the other hand, Einstein idealized reality by pretending that a quantity in quantum mechanics called Planck's constant is negligible. So they're each playing games with each other. General relativity takes gravity into account but ignores quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics takes quantum mechanics into account but ignores gravity. Now, why are they doing this to each other? So let's go on and talk about this for a minute. Now, there are three constants in my life that appear in both of these theories in various ways, and that are the engines that drive these two theories. So they are the speed of light, the constant of gravity, and Max, meaning Max Planck, the guy who created the Planck number, which we will go on through now. Now, first of all, there's the speed of light, which is written in physics notation as c. It appears in this equation. I don't expect you to know any math. Don't get daunted here. You can look at this equation and you can think poetry if you want. All I want you to do is note that ds squared equals c squared and then a whole bunch of other stuff. The geometry of space-time itself, as expressed in this equation, which is known as the Minkowski metric, and which is the basic definition of the metric in which we live, has in it the speed of light as a constant, and that constant determines the geometry of space-time. Okay? That's why it's important to Einstein's theory. Then we have Newton's gravitational constant. Here it is. On the left there you have the Einstein tensor, which depends upon the curvature of the metric, and on the right you'll see the stress-energy tensor, which is T sub mu sub V. And that describes the flow of energy and momentum due to all the other fields. And you'll know that G is part of that right-hand element. And what G does is it tells you how much the geometry of space-time is affected by other fields. Now, by other fields, we can interpret that to mean any objects in the metric. So what that tells you, essentially, is that the gravity that pulls the Earth towards the Moon or the Moon towards the Earth is not the only force operating in the universe. There's the gravity of the Sun on both of them, and there's the gravitational fields of all the other stars and planets in the universe. They all come to act on this. And that tells us, first of all, that in a well-formed theory of physics, one that should describe the phenomena of our world perfectly, there will be no unmoved movers. All geometrical structures should themselves be local degrees of freedom, which is to say, there will be no background. And one of the chief problems, in fact, the chief problem, without question, in trying to find a theory that will describe both the large and the small, is to find a background-free theory with local degrees of freedom that propagate causally. Now, I'm getting a little technical here, and I don't want to do it too much, but by local degrees of freedom propagating causally, what I mean through a little prestidigitation is a world in which the speed of light is constant and in which nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. And if you can get that and you can have no backcloth, you'll be fine. And we're working on it. So the third constant is the Planck number. And let's take a quick pass at that so you have an idea of what these three constants are. The Planck length, which requires both the other constants we talked about, both the speed of light and the gravitational constant, appears in this equation. And it works out to be approximately 1.6 times 10 to the minus 35 meters. That's an incredibly small amount. That is way smaller than any subatomic particle that we know. It is the limits of possible measurement. Because, and you'll have to think about this one for a minute, let me do it this way. Here we have two other equations which depend each in their own way on the other constants. Now the top one is called the Compton wavelength. Now the Compton wavelength is the wavelength at which, if you were to try to examine a particle using that wavelength, the wavelength would be so short that the energy you would need in order to create it would be a sufficient amount of energy to create a new particle. Now that is a purely quantum mechanical statement. You don't create particles in general relativity. Now the other one is the Schwarzschild radius, and that one is the radius at which, when you squeeze matter together, it will fall in and become a black hole. Okay, one determines the limit of large stuff, the other one determines the limit of small stuff. Now, the interesting thing about these two is that, as it says at the bottom there, they're equal when that quantity m in both of them equals the Planck mass.